Hello, my name is Nicholas Poling, and in this presentation, I'm going to discuss the process of creating a video game from my perspective as a student. Now, so a little bit about myself is I am not a professional game developer yet. As of now, I have no games to my name, and this presentation is from the perspective of a student through school projects and personal projects that to help document my progress throughout the development. During this presentation, I'm going to be sharing my experience thus far and any advice I have thus far. So, where does it all begin? It all starts with a person's desire, either a person with money and desire to create a video game. Putting in the effort to do so, this is either in the form of gathering or paying for a team, or putting in the effort, time, and resources themselves to learn and perform themselves. The next step is learning to manage the team or yourself's energy and time. This would be the manager's role in everything. So you'd think that the first step is just doing or learning, or just you're on the job, you're just going to go and do it, right? No. I'm guilty of just doing this, of just jumping in and just trying to learn how to do things, and I found that I've run into problems when trying to do it, where if I had planned ahead, I would have saved myself some time and headache. Or learning why there are different practices and what those practices are and how to do them. For any professional developers or more experienced developers, I hope that you would be able to share your thoughts and comments below. I'd like to hear your story while I share mine. So, what is a manager's role in everything? It is to provide a conducive space for the shared teams and departments to have a shared space that's conducive to making a video game. Well, since this project just consists of me, myself, and I, communication is not the highest list on my priorities. It's just, what should I do? That seems cool. The main project is this project is the first 3 bullet points: providing a space, in this case a space to learn, managing my time and resources so that each day I work towards achieving my goal of creating a video game, and developing those skills further, specifically the skills of Blender, Unreal, and C++, as are just those 3 that I'm focusing on, to answer the question of not just how to use the assets in Unreal, but how do I get assets into Unreal. The first sprint I've done thus far is just focused on creating a space for video games. So that is working in Confluence, developing the table of contents, how each thing is meant to perform in Confluence and plan it out, and then working in Jira, creating the tasks. I know I can do better, specifically with description and time estimation, but this was just a template for right now. While Jira and Confluence are more for the practice of a video game student environment, my main focus is the other four bullet points. There are spaces this project needs to make sure that I can perform to the best of my ability. A space for Blender, programming, C++ or Python, and Unreal. I know that Jira and Confluence are important further down the line, as well as making sure that the package project works as intended. Because it doesn't matter if it... That one? Because I know that in practice, any game can work differently from the editor versus the package product, and as developers, our main concern will be if the package product works as intended. So, who am I to give this advice when I don't have any games to my name? I have the school projects and I have my personal projects, but I have no release games. Who am I to give advice? Well, all I can do is talk about the experience I've had thus far. Get some advice from those who have done better, gone further, and who've made games. And try my best to help others. Something coworkers and schoolmates have commented on is when I do my best work is trying to help others. So this is why this is the story of why these skills in particular and what happened for me to come to this conclusion. So unlike Gabriel here, I know why possessed me. I know what possessed me to ask why. My time at Full Sail University was educational, especially in the last few months leading up to the capstone project. The need for communication through Confluence, Jira, Discord, as well as the game design department's need for space. It communicated the need for these spaces. It took some trial and error to figure out what that looks like. A space for communication, a space for metric levels and game mechanics, a space for level design, a space for visual and sound departments to come together and do their work, a space for the animation, cinematics, and art departments to come together and do their work, and a space for management to come in and plan out what they need to do, what the different departments need to do. So that's the first question of communication. All healthy relationships have a cornerstone of healthy communication. If you can't healthily communicate, you're kind of boned. Through a bit of miscommunication, my biggest issue at the time was, what does that space even look like? As well as a bit of overthinking and anxiety on my part that honestly would have been mitigated had I just focused on the task at hand. while the full sail capstone project officially begins during the capstone project class course, while on paper it begins learning on how to use Confluence and Jira, the truth is it begins a little bit earlier. No, while on paper it begins after learning Confluence and Jira, the truth is it begins then and there, learning how to use Confluence, Jira, and Discord to plan and communicate. This taught me that creating a space for management to plan and communicate. Because I was part of a team that didn't plan, didn't communicate for the first 2 attempts at the capstone project. And it was in my third where, through some actual good communication, we finally got a good capstone project going. So, while each department's team would have their own apps, tools for their development, what creating a space in this context means is importing files, file structures, and where to test different results in and outside of Unreal. So the first manager's role is creating a space of, so what does that actually look like as far as creating a space? So creating a space for communication in Jira and Confluence, a place for version control and maintenance in the form of Perforce, a place for animations, some in the form of openings and cinematics in the form of different widgets, different cartoons, different Blender files that they can test in Unreal. That is the part I'm going to be working on throughout this project. A place for game proper to eventually test on new game, save game, load, and delete game functionality, as well as further package product details such as level design and other important game mechanics. A place to test different variables as well as different systems that exist throughout the game in the form of a game instance, because those will be the variables that affect the whole game. A place to test any hardware issues such as in a splash page. It was during this project that I first attempted to use an Xbox controller, and I ran into a problem that was with the hardware. It was receiving input that I was not giving it, and at first I thought it was a programming issue until I researched that, yeah, the secondhand Xbox controller I bought was broken. No duh. So I did end up buying a new one. So a place for the audio and sound department to do their work in the place of an options menu. And a place for metric levels, game levels, mechanics, testing, a place for all forms of metrics, and just asking the question, would, could, maybe if this department would need a level to test this in the engine or game at any point later on. And I keep mentioning departments. What I mean is this Excel worksheet that was done by a Tyvic Stallworth. that I was used to kind of help guide me in creating this project. Just a different thing of all the different disciplines that go into making a video game. What would their space look like? What would they need? How would I incorporate that in the project? And just what would that look like from a Jira or Confluence page? So during during the capstone, after we as the classmates figure out what we needed to do, and joining up and creating this team, what would be our role as the students? So the students went back and forth between two roles: management of creating and assigning the tasks, based off of what we think our abilities are, and what gameplay elements we're trying to recreate and replicate, then switching roles to go into management, from management to go into game design. The gameplay mechanics specifically to attempt to replicate those mechanics in the game while reporting to our successes, our bugs, our handicaps, our derailments to our bosses, our teachers, our classmates, and ourselves. While it was tempting to over or underestimate how long a task would take, on paper that was a bad idea, because the whole point of the capstone project was to test how accurately you judged your own abilities. Any deviation is going to look bad, but at the same time, remember, nobody's perfect. You can overestimate, you can underestimate what you actually can do. Life happens. And after that, we as developers, our main focus is creating a fun game. What mechanics do we find enjoyable? What games are we trying to recreate? Our focus is the game mechanics. The other departments, the level design, art design, the UI, none of our concern. Not my problem. And this is why I'm focusing on this kind of diagram here. This diagram is kind of meant to show each department's kind of starting line. And while this is a highlight and zoom in that might demonstrate different communication therein, so our focus was just on game design. If we need any other assets, use placeholders and move on. It's the importance of asking for placeholders and moving on is so that you can move on to other parts of the project and not waste time. Well, that's my problem. That was the next why. Define placeholder. That's partially based off of skill. One person's simple in an artist's or animator's rigging that might be easy to them and they can do in a day, an hour, a week. I've attempted to do it. It's taken me months with me watching Blender videos. I'm not good at it. And I feel the need to get some Blender animations in Unreal because I've just reached a brick wall of I need a placeholder just to move forward I can't get any placeholders. How do I move forward? That's why I'm learning Blender. I need the character to swing a sword in a certain way, and they're not swinging it. I don't know how to even begin to make them swing it. I know it's getting blenders in animation, but how? So please define placeholder. So my first major project after working in the capstone, finished capstone, moving on, was I called it Project Test. I know, original and brilliant idea. So Project Test was the name of a portfolio project where I was attempting to recreate elements from Ratchet and Clank series, the Dark Souls series, the Portal series, and just whatever elements I found fun. Now, here are the problems I ran into. I liked the idea of the metric level. I didn't know quite fully what it meant as far as creating different metrics to test and where the computer science portion of creating a video game comes in. So I created this showcase level that was honestly just a mess. My next problem was focusing on creating the new game, save game, load, delete, and load game and delete game feature. I think those save game features are neat. I wanted to learn how to do it. But I wasn't understanding why people recommend not to do that so early in a project. So what had happened was that the save system, what it does is it wraps up all these different subsystems in a nice little bow. That's really cool if you're done. If you're not done working on those nice little subsystems, you have to essentially go through a checklist, and whenever you work on one, go through and make sure you haven't screwed up the others. That's option one with creating a save system with structs. That option, well, not option, but that problem. Best case scenario, it's a cumbersome to-do list that just adds more and more time to your project, which if your payroll or management would really tick you off. Why are you wasting time with my money? Now, the worst case scenario. Tying all these systems up in a nice little bow, and something does go wrong, and they're all affected, and they all need to be cleaned up, really sucks, and could potentially ruin whatever project you've been working on. And that is how I learned that maybe saving the save system for the end, or trying to figure out different ways around it, and not having a fully functional one just yet, is probably the best idea. Now, the next problem I ran into is I never got the question answered of how do I even get these assets that I need in Unreal into Unreal? I know I can import them, I know I can put them in projects, but what is the process or the pipeline for people who get the request to make these assets, how they make them, how they get the deliverables, and how those deliverables affect Unreal. Now, I've since watched more YouTube videos that explained it partially, but it's still just learning that process. Now, the next problem I ran into was I just focused on one project at a time without any consideration of what mechanics need to be the foundation mechanics. And once I had gone too far, I kind of made it harder or impossible to go back and fix it. Because that is important. What's not just what is the foundational mechanics, but what am I building off of? Project Test, it was whatever I found fun at the time, whatever I wanted to learn at the time, and whatever I thought would be fun. It was a full steam ahead. Will this be fun to make? Will this be fun to play? Yes, then go. Now, the other problem is not understanding the resources I had at my disposal. Unreal can use an Xbox controller, which is a lot easier for me to use than keyboard and mouse. And as far as creating tutorials and widgets that explain how to use something, I found that putting it the button prompts is a lot easier than what keyboard and mouse combination triggers what where. Now, this part of any project is reporting on what went wrong. The post-mortem, the autopsy, and trying to figure out how to understand those pitfalls and how to move forward. In the case of Project Test, it was learning why some practices are in place. Of Project Test and Capstone, of why we're learning how to do these things. So, making a showcase level, cool, it got me to show off, made testing a nightmare. Making a fully functional save game, cool, everything's in a nice little bow, and if I turn the game off and then turn it back on, I don't lose my spot. There are ways around that. The terrible thing about creating a save game, it ties everything up in a nice little bow. So one change here affects everywhere else. So part of development is asking the silly questions. Why do we have the splash page? When are we testing the new game, save game, load game feature? How are we getting around it? And how are those two things related? Because so if you use a splash page as kind of you exited the game without exiting the game, that lets you test the save game feature, the delete game feature, new game and load game feature, without actually having to save it to the computer, without possibly having to tie up everything in the last bow. It's you have everything out before you, like it's a Christmas gift. You have all your pages out before you, but it's not in the box yet. The game instance, the splash page, and the save game feature can all work together to get a close to a fully functioning feature without taking those last few steps that tie up that nice little bow. And using that kind of method, it does mean that when you attempt to do it, each time you open the game, like fully open, it is treating it like the first time you install the game. Well, that's cool, but what if I still need to test from a certain point? Am I supposed to just keep replaying up to that point to test that one thing, which could waste hours, if not days or weeks of time? No. You, as a developer, would be able to keep track of all those different variables, either some way or somehow, understand what variables are important, and more importantly, you'd have better control over those variables without having to tie everything up, which would then lead you to the ability to have pre-built save files that are on the first installed game that can be deleted and saved, but all you have to do to get them back is just open the game again, so that all these other variables are fixed, and the one thing that you're testing, you know you're actually testing for. So I'm going to ask you, what's the difference between returning to the splash page and closing the game out fully, and closing the game out with a fully functioning save system? Why are you closing out the game? And why are you closing out the game? These are important questions to ask, silly as they may be, because they do lead to development. So what's the purpose of a showcase level? To show off. To say, hey, this is what I made. Ain't it cool? The purpose of the metrics level is to test. The purpose of an options menu is to test, set, and play with the different sound and visual mechanics. And the purpose of management building the design document is to know what are the important mechanics and functions going forward, and what everything will be built around. Because I mentioned Dark Souls in Project Test, but part of the Dark Souls mechanics is the inventory system and the fighting system, which I was then spit at a wall in trying to create. So, what is the UtPL project game thing? Well, it stands for Understanding the Pipeline. As I ask these silly questions, like how do the different assets get into Unreal and how are they tested in Unreal, I'm learning Blender and C++. The point, why have this practice game, this practice project at all? Point is to incorporate it and to see how all these different assets and different assets, disciplines, skills interact with each other. The purpose is to understand the pipeline. The purpose is to understand the pipeline, how those requests for assets are handled by different teams, how those assets are imported into Unreal, and how Unreal manipulates those assets. Because I have had the same dream of becoming a video game developer since kindergarten. That's why I start my diagram with the phrase, we/I want to make a video game. By understanding the pipeline as different timelines, I can track all the different requests and steps. By understanding the pipeline as a timeline, I can track all the different requests and steps into making a game. I understand that this diagram timeline is a little unrealistic by showing all the departments starting at the same time. It is just a tool after all. But it is just a tool that's used to keep track of the hypothetical requests and actions and work done of each department to simulate or help simulate a work environment. While the actual pipeline and timeline would look closer to something like this, different departments have different needs and responsibilities. So it makes sense that some departments would have different start times and end times. While management would be aligned throughout the life cycle of a game, some departments get to move on to other projects sooner rather than later. So I invite others who have worked in these kind of environments, who have made games, to share their stories of just what it's like working in a game studio. Do you have fun or horror management stories? Did you do something cool that you would like to share? I'd like to learn. Now, it would look closer to something like this. Management talks to itself, gives out requests, does some work back and forth. Management gives requests, does some work back and forth, sends in report. Where management reconvenes, plans, and distributes the workload, and the departments work and discuss among themselves and reporting back to management on updates and documents. Now, probably some inter-department communication going back and forth, just from art team asking game mechanics, just what's up, why the need for this. Maybe it's through a chain of command, maybe it's a bit less linear and more casual. This is a special thanks for Tyvic Stallworth for providing an Excel page describing the disciplines involving the video game industry, and Gabriel Iglesias for providing the comedic expression during his comedy skit Road Trip. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear your stories. And I hope to keep reporting on my progress through understanding the pipeline.